Hey there, it's me, Bill, back here in the tiny little workshop. This week, going to be trying to turn this shock absorber from the rear of a 1983 Nissan 280ZX into a lathe tool. We'll see how it goes. Before I could extract the shock absorber shaft from this whole assembly, I needed to grab a pair of cheap Harbor Freight spring compressors from the toolbox. They'd already failed on me once. In fact, one of them is now nicknamed Stinky Pete because the third time that I ever used these things, the soft metal in two of the captain nuts completely stripped out and they had to be replaced. As added insurance, here's Pip acting as safety supervisor for the project. I don't have my air compressors at the workshop yet, so this was also a disappointing time to find out that all the batteries for the electric impact were dead. The tightening of the spring compressors had to be done the slow way, by hand. With the load off of the top hat, I used a pair of vice grips to hold things steady so I could loosen the nut. After that, everything just kind of pulls apart and we're left with a bare strut. Now, certain shock absorber designs rely on the shock body being filled with a gas that's at a very high pressure. So to be on the safe side, I did not cut into the white painted part. Instead, I cut off the protruding portion of the shaft with a metal chop saw. It was now time to start removing metal. I began at the bench grinder with a little bit of cleanup. Then I moved on to the flattening of one side of the shaft. I tried not to grind away too much material too quickly. This can heat the metal too much in any one spot, and it could soften it if it gets hot enough. Smooth and steady motions help maintain consistency across the surface. In the end, it had one roughly flat-ish side on it. I finished up the initial shaping by clamping the shock absorber shaft in a vise and putting a grinding wheel on my 4.5-inch angle grinder. Now, the first order of business was just to make the surface truly flat. After that came the steady artistic part, where I had to grind steel out of the center of the body to make a flute. This involved plenty of double checking to make sure that the shape was coming out correctly, and then going back to remove a little more material and check it again, so on, so forth, lather, rinse, repeat. I'm just carefully trying to smooth out all the transitions along the whole length of this flute just by eye. Now that it was mostly resembling the final shape that I had in mind, I wanted to really even out the flute itself. My first idea didn't turn out so well. I tried to cover a dowel with sandpaper and chuck it up in the drill press, but it kind of worked, but it just wasn't going as well as I'd hoped. That was when I remembered that my El Cheapo rotary tool had tiny sanding drums, and they were even the exact diameter that I was looking for. The last step was to grind the bevel on the underside and create the cutting face. I simply clamped a piece of wood to my belt sanding jig at a roughly 45-degree angle and let it act as a rest while I carefully cut the bevel with 36 grit sandpaper. The build of the belt sander jig is covered in a separate video on this channel. Without even bothering to do any more sharpening than that, it was put to work immediately. I had a chunk of solid oak chucked up in the lathe, and the moment of truth was at hand. Ooh, wow. Look at those chips fly. This made everything go much, much faster than my first lathe project where I was using flat chisels to try and shape things. That's also another video on this channel. The wood came off very easily, but it also left behind a nice, smooth surface. I didn't really need any other tools to finish turning this handle. After a quick once-over with some sandpaper, it was good to go. The very last thing to do was to drill a hole for the tool to fit snugly into. With that, it was all done. Made plenty of sawdust here. This is my first dedicated lathe tool. I made it myself. It cost me absolutely nothing. The shock absorber I already had. The wood from the handle came from a pallet. This turned out way better than I ever expected. It removes material extremely well. Time will tell if it lasts like it should, if it keeps a nice sharp edge. I'll keep you updated on that. Maybe if this doesn't work out, I'll make another one out of some high-speed steel. But for now, I mean, for what I have invested in it, this works really, really well. The material came off really fast, left a nice smooth finish behind, so I am very pleased, and I'll see you next time.